Good evening. This is a meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission from the Great Hall in Plymouth on August 23rd. This meeting is hybrid, meaning it's in person as well as via Zoom webinar and can be viewed live on the local government channel 15, Comcast, and channel 47, Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. And for public comment, Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. In-person audience, for public comment, use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. So we will begin with a Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have 7 members of the commission here tonight, either in person or on Zoom. And I welcome Pat Lloyd from the Collins Commission. Our assistant, Michelle Turner, is tonight on Zoom. So before we begin tonight, I'd just like to reiterate a few rules of engagement. I think, first of all, tonight we're going to go through the charter again. We have a new draft tonight that's redlined that shows the changes from last night. So it's right up to date. And we'll go page by page, but would everyone please use the new version tonight so we're all talking from the same document. And the new version says in the upper right-hand corner, August 22nd. The B version last night was August 22nd, the A version. Tonight I would like to have commissioners speak only with respect to exact wording changes in the charter. We really don't have time for history lessons, anecdotes, comments. We really need to get philosophizing. We need to look at the exact wording because we have about a week to go before we have to present a text to the newspaper to be published, and we want to be sure we get the wording correct. So tonight, just please propose precise wording for the commission to consider. I will ask if anyone objects. If no one objects, then we'll adopt that wording change. Or perhaps your change would be to simply delete wording, and that would be another way to amend what we have in front of us. So if the meeting for Thursday night has been canceled, we really don't need it. I think we're going to get through the charter this evening, and then there is a meeting next Monday night. There are 3 items pending a 9-commissioner meeting. One of them is the number of town meeting members per precinct. The second is the makeup of the Board of the Select Board between at-large and regional members. And third was the charter enforcement provision, whether the report goes to the select board or to the town manager or stays with the town clerk. So let's start with tonight's charter. The first page of the version we're talking about tonight is page number 4. The prior pages are the table of contents, which will be cleaned up in the next couple of days. So page number 4 has the preamble, which is the first substantive provision in the charter. As we go along, I'll point out the changes from last night, and then we'll see if we have any further changes. In the preamble from last night, we made a change in the paragraph 1 so that it reads, balanced by a respectful harmony with protection and appreciation of our natural environment, including the rights of nature. The only change I might suggest there is, does rights of nature have to be capitalized? I would think we just use small letters. Frank, do you want to comment on that? That was.
Well, it is a specific area of law, a new area of law, so I think unless we're speaking of something,
You think it should be capitalized?
I think it should be capitalized.
Yes?
Yes.
I'm okay.
Okay. Next page is page 5. There are no changes from last night. This is the basic fundamental beginnings of the charter, form of government, intergovernmental relations, and so forth. Again, we come to page 6, and a reminder to the Collins Commission that we're still waiting on definitions, and including the definition of the word annual town meeting. There were no changes on page 7. Page 8, section 2-2-1 refers to the number of town meeting members, and that's an open question. Originally, we were keeping the number of town meeting members to 9. A motion was made a couple of meetings ago to reduce that to 6 per precinct. That motion failed on a 4-4 vote with 8 members present. And we have our last member.
I understand that Collins is going to deal with the annual town meeting. Should we be giving them the guidelines by which they can make that? I
thought we discussed it, Larry, but because the state statute, I believe, defines annual town meeting as the spring town meeting.
We have had spring and fall as annual town meetings.
But if you read the state statute, it specifically says that.
Um,
So I think we asked Collins to take a look at it.
Okay.
To see what, because it did seem to be that inconsistency.
Well, we'll have to, once they come back, we'll have to deal with it.
Right.
I'm happy to chime in for a second.
Okay, Pat, go ahead. Pat Lloyd from
yeah,
the Collins Group.
My colleagues are also taking a look of the draft of annual town meeting. I'm wondering if it's a matter of semantics to you that both be called annual town meeting, because we do believe there should only be one annual town meeting, and that's generally referenced to the spring, the first mandatory meeting of the year. However, I'm still not quite clear on the rationale behind trying to name both of them annual town meeting.
Well, may I? First of all, the petitioning process is different between an annual and a special. 10 signatures for a petition for an annual, 100 for a special. And the advice that we received from town council was that the fall annual town meeting was indeed an annual town meeting, and since we've had the October town meeting in the charter, it has been treated as an annual town meeting. So if we don't do that, that would be a substantial change to what we've done for the past couple of decades.
Right. Well, I appreciate the clarification, and I'll definitely take another look at that and check and get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay. I think there's also another problem in the charter which refers to the annual town meeting as a timeline event. And it was just a question of which, if they were both annual town meetings, which one it referred to. I remember there was a couple of, it said, before the next annual town meeting, that kind of wording. So if we only had one of them, that would be one thing. But if we had two, it would be something else.
I mean, we certainly could say spring annual
Yeah, right.
if we needed clarification.
We just need to take a position on which way we're going to do it.
Right.
Betsy Hall?
That's what I was going to say, that maybe one could be called spring annual town meeting and one could be called fall annual town meeting with parameters of time, when that happens. Because to my knowledge, we do a special and an annual every fall and every spring.
David?
So what do you call the third meeting that we're proposing?
The third annual town meeting. Anyways, we need to resolve this in the next week or so, but so I'll wait for the Collins Commission to give us their advice, and then we'll make a decision as a commission. David Peck, did you have something? Point? Okay. Right. Okay, moving along in the charter. In a few places, you'll see the type is in bold. That's not intentional. That'll be cleaned up. All the type should stay the same. It'll either be black or it'll be red if it's a change.
I have a word question on 223.
223, right.
Which says the town clerk shall serve as the clerk. The town, all the notices shall be posted in town hall, town's libraries, and posted on the town's website, and take reasonable efforts to post to the social media. And I was wondering if, we could take out reasonable efforts. I'm not quite sure what that means. When we shall post elsewhere and take reasonable means for social media.
If I may, as former clerk, bond counsel reads the charter quite carefully, and we need to prove to bond counsel that we have legally posted the meetings. And the legal postings are 2 libraries, town hall, and the website. And the reason that the reasonable efforts is intentionally wishy-washy, it directs the clerk to do it, but it's not part of the legal responsibilities that bond counsel is going, and the attorney general will be checking on. So it seems to me that that's well stated.
Okay, just because it looked slightly wishy-washy compared to the others, but it
Well,
has
it is.
It has a reason.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Betsy?
Yes, back to page 6, definitions. This very small change, but we need to have annual town meeting be A, and then bylaw be B. So just a note to Michelle.
Okay. Thank you. The next item, which is a change we agreed to last night, is in 26-4, referring to the Committee of Precinct Chairs. We added the vice chairperson. So the Committee of Precinct Chairs would organize by electing a chairperson, vice chairperson, and a clerk. The next comment on the charter, there's a few places where it says TBD. We have to go back, and we'll do that in the next couple of days and fill in the section numbers, which the beginning parts of the charter didn't know what the later numbers would be, and now we know that. So we will fill those missing references in those blanks. 28-1, election of town moderator by the town meeting. That's one of our issues that have been submitted to council as to whether that can be squared with the state statute and how the moderator is to be elected. Council's had it about 10 days now. I expect we'll get an answer soon, hopefully, certainly by next week.
Bill, another sort of small note, back to page 10 under procedures. It says a third non-mandatory town meeting shall be scheduled for January of the calendar year following the spring annual meeting. So I just put an asterisk there because when we get our
Excuse me, what was the reference? Page 10?
Page 10 at the bottom, it's red, in that red line there. It references the spring annual meeting. Do you see that? The red, it's line 253 on page 10.
Yeah, I see it. This is the new change about the non-mandatory
Right.
town meeting, the
We
third one.
reference the spring annual meeting, so I'm putting an asterisk there, so we'll come back to it when we have the definitions settled from definitions, is it going to be called spring annual meeting, or what's it going to be called, right?
So what is the, do you have a change here, or?
There's no change, it's just that if we make a change in whether if we end up calling them spring annual meeting and fall annual meeting, then this will work, but if we don't, if we call it something else, then we'll need to come back
Well,
here
first of all,
and make that
We'll get an
change.
answer from Collins on this annual town meeting question very
Right.
soon.
That's what I'm saying, is when we have the answer to that, we should remember to come back and look at line 253.
Larry?
I think we need to define what kind of town meeting. There are two types, obviously, an annual and a special.
None of these
And
are-
I do believe that this non-mandatory
Is it
is
annual?
a special.
What do you think it's a special?
Absolutely. I mean, you
Okay.
can't have an annual town meeting that doesn't exist. That doesn't make sense. And so it seems to me that we ought to add the word special, a third non-mandatory special town meeting shall be scheduled, to clarify the process.
Objection? No objection. Larry, what about also putting it in the last line? It says 30 days prior to such January, put special town meeting.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy, for that.
Okay, so the next one. A couple things. I mentioned the moderator, which was section 8. Going on from there, there's a comment at the end of 281, which says Collins to draft language saying COPC will vet candidates for moderator. And that's now, that language really consists of a single sentence. It's 5-5-2, which is over in the section regarding nominations for moderator and so forth. And we'll come to it, but basically it says that the precinct chairs will host an event or whatever to have moderator candidates present their platforms. You'll see it at 5-5-2. So this yellow comment here will come out. And then on the next page was another change we made last night in 2-9-1 under section 9, compulsory attendance. So it would read, all town officers, town manager, town engineer, chairpersons of elected and appointed boards. The new words are elected and appointed.
Mr. Chairman, we had this discussion last night. I just want to point out that my understanding, looking into it, is that town officers include all elected officials.
Mhm.
So before that had not,
Yeah,
we
right.
talked about my being omitted from the
So,
town meeting.
so Frank, your comment was town officers would include all elected officials. I think that's right.
I think that's how it's defined.
Right.
So we should have been invited normally to
Yes.
the town meeting.
Okay? Let's see, the next comment I have is in chapter 3. Did anybody have anything else in chapter 2? In chapter 3, the first long section on the select board, that's the other second question that's been submitted to town council. So that's still, if it may get
Mr. Chairman,
revised.
you skipped over the one change we made in 2-13-4, changing, omitting the 60-day report.
Yes, excuse me, right.
Yeah, that
That's been
was
struck.
another change we made.
Yeah, it should be that way in the new draft, that it's only two
Yeah,
reports
yeah,
now.
it is, yeah.
And actually, the point on the select board is not, I misspoke there. It's not a question of town council, it's a question of this board, whether this commission, whether we want to change that provision. It was brought up at the last meeting, I think by Betsy, that she wished to revisit it. But we thought we'd wait till we had all members present before we take a vote as to whether the select board will be made up of 5 at large and 2 regional. Does that take us to the town manager section?
Before you do that, Bill, where are we looking at, I'm sorry, I'm rushing through, trying to find it. Where are we looking at the planning board having the ability to have an alternate who can vote? Is that under? We'll get to it. Oh, we're not there yet. Okay, very good, thank you.
Let's see, the next change in this draft tonight had to do with the number of votes to appoint a town manager or fire a town manager. And it was thought that if we have a 7-member select board, we should increase that from 4 to 5. So 5 would be the magic number instead of 4 if we had 7 select board members. That was in 2 places at the beginning of the town manager section. Specifically, it was in 3-4-1. It says, select board shall appoint a town manager by an affirmative vote. And now it says 5 members of the board. So the next changes is in the section 5 under town managers' powers and duties. That long list has now been organized by letter and by grouping, and it now runs through, looks like Z, although I don't see any Y there. VWX. Yeah, if maybe Z should be Y. Did you see a Y? Looks like there's one missing letter, so we can double check that. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman, do we need in this listing of town manager duties, do we need the reference to Article 20, Motion 2 of the fall meeting of 2018? I mean, there's 1 or 2 references to votes. We may not need them if we're now in the new charter.
Right, that's been in the charter it's like a fossil. Maybe we should finally take it out. I think when that was a relatively new statutory reference, we put it in, but we don't have to keep carrying it forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Betsy, yes.
Again, in line 727 and 728 and 729, we have reference to now fall town meeting without the word annual. So we'll want to make that standard, I would think, throughout the charter.
Yeah.
And also decide, are we going to call it fall annual town meeting, or what are we going to call it?
So Betsy,
Because we just have fall town meeting
yeah,
now.
which item are you looking at?
At the top of page 30, numbers 727 and 728 and 729.
Okay, page 30, which letter?
Page 30 at the top. We were just talking about it, Mr. Peck
Those references at the
referenced
top of the page?
Article 20, yeah.
Yeah, these must have actually been put in back in 2018, David, because that's when we did our charter
Yeah.
review committee.
Yeah, I just think in this new charter, we
Yeah,
can
we should
probably
take them
strike
out.
them.
Oh,
Right.
we're just going to take it out anyway,
Yeah.
probably. Oh, okay.
Good point. Yep.
But it should be uniform throughout the charter once we figure it out.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And in reference to the 361, same page, we fixed the reference to the Public Works. Qualifications shall be added the word especially fitted by education, training, and experience. So that phrase now appears in all the directors. It's the same language.
I don't exactly apologize for
No,
not
but we
being here for
discussed
the
it.
past 2 weeks, but
Right.
we've decided not to agree with the town manager's
No,
request.
we did agree with them.
Well,
so
he
the-
asked us to leave that section.
No, but we had here, for example, that required a master's degree.
No, I understand, but
So we took that out.
he was hoping that section 6,
Oh, okay, we agreed there too, by putting a paragraph at the end of each of those 3 sections that basically says that the town manager, notwithstanding the language, can reorganize if he sees fit. You'll see it at the end of that
Okay.
section.
I know we're not quite there yet.
So it's actually there, just to tell you, it's on page 32.
Right. No, I see that. In the section on finance,
Yep.
the data processing is not presently part of the Department of Finance, and we just put it in.
So,
That seems.
so how did it get put in?
What's that?
Who put it in?
Well, it was in the old charter,
This page
But the-
32?
line 800.
Let's see, now what version have you?
We're
got? Uh-oh.
August 22nd, B, that,
Okay, but you're looking at 383? Actually, it's
394,
394.
and
Line
then
800.
the third from the bottom line, it
It
mentions.
says data processing.
Right.
Right.
And, I mean, I think we're doing what we don't want to do, which is to say we're setting up a situation in which the charter is going to be ignored.
So Larry, you're recommending we remove data processing, is that correct?
Sure.
I thought we changed it to IT. Did we not change it to IT?
We changed it when the intent was to remove all references to data processing.
Okay, so that
But,
reference.
but
yeah.
it still exists. It's also in line 781, as well as line 800. So,
I mean, it's in 2 places on this one page.
yes. So that needs to be edited.
So we want to take out the words data processing in both places?
Does the sentence make sense if we take it out?
Yes,
Okay.
Oh, yeah, substitute information technology or,
Well, no,
or delete it.
delete it.
She doesn't do information.
To
technology.
give the town manager the general power to do what needs to be done.
So just to be clear, it comes out of 38-2, right? Because it's there at the top of the page. 38-2 says general supervision of all data processing. So we want to take that out. Do we leave in activities and equipment of town government offices and agencies?
yes.
Excuse me, should we be removing all 781 and 782 on page 32 at the top? Because general supervision, it says of data processing functions, and I think it's also referring to activities and equipment of data processing. Maybe the whole rest of that sentence
What do
needs
you
to
think?
go.
Yeah, I think leave it, I would, both of those lines, the and general supervision, because I think activities and equipment of town government offices and agencies refers to the information technology process, and since that's not going to be part of finance, just leave those 2 lines out.
So it ends with and general supervision. That whole,
No, just, it ends with,
By the
all
town,
goods,
period.
services, materials, and supplies by the town.
right, so and
Period.
general supervision is stricken.
Yeah,
The whole thing.
Okay, and then down below, we just take out data processing.
yep.
Okay. Got it. So in 3-13-1, the question of an associate member of the planning board is a legal question that town council is going to get back to us on, or actually our special counsel.
Bill, very minor, line 911, there's a hyphen missing. 3-13-7.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not,
That's in the charter.
Oh, right, I see it.
so it's, what is the, I have a different line number, so what's the paragraph?
313-7.
Right.
Yeah, as opposed to 3-137.
Yeah, it says 137 instead of 13. It doesn't say 13-7.
Yep, I see it. Yep, good, thank you. Mhm. So Frank, we had a question regarding one of the changes that you brought up last night. Regard the consistency with the master plan. And you're concerned that it looked like the planning director was calling the shots when it should be the
Oh,
planning
yeah.
board?
I was looking at one that hadn't had some changes made, so I think that the language
okay with it?
is fine, yes.
Yeah. Because the commentary goes back to the planning board.
But it does show that the commentary are improved by the planning board in the end of that, the last paragraph, doesn't it?
So the next change that was made was in 3-13-9, which was the reference to the Land Use and Acquisition Committee. So that sentence, as changed last night, would read, "The Land Use and Acquisition Committee," and then we added the words, "an Open Space Committee and all department heads, along with the Select Board, should be sent direct notice of intent to sell, convert for another use any parcel of land under Chapter 61. 3-13-9.
I have a question about that, Bill. Actually, I have two.
Okay, Betsy, say
Yeah,
again.
Mr. Chairman, I have two questions about that section,
Which section?
313-9. Is Bill Cohen still with us? Bill, are you still with us?
I'm here. I'm just having a little trouble with my camera. It seems to be a little jumpy.
We're talking about 313-9 on page 37 of the master draft that we talked about yesterday. Remember, we talked about adding open space? So the two questions I have, the Land Use and Acquisition Committee, the Open Space Committee, and all department heads, along with the Select Board, shall be sent direct notice of intent to sell. Who is sending that direct notice? I thought it was going to be the Select Board that was sending that notice.
Your question, Betsy, is who sends the notice?
Who sends the notice?
No,
Who sends it?
Correct.
it actually comes from whoever is petitioning to take their land out of 61, either 61A or 61B.
But David, that comes from a lawyer, right? So are you saying that lawyer has to send it to all these different groups? Or the person at town hall that gets it?
No, it goes to, the document would be sent to the town manager. The town manager
Right.
gets the document.
Okay.
The legal document that is sent by a lawyer representing the person removing.
So the town manager's office would make this distribution?
Yeah.
So maybe we should say it more directly. The town manager shall send direct notice to. rather than sort of the backward passive sort of way we put it. Does that make sense?
I think you can leave it like it is, you can do
The notice, the notice will be sent to the town, to the select.
Bill Cohan, we can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No,
Okay, so, all right.
that's
There
better.
you go.
I was just saying that when the legal notices when the legal notice arrives at town hall, it goes to town manager's office, because the town manager's office represents the board of select. So from there, it can be distributed to as Betty, excuse me, Betsy, and David are indicating, it can be distributed from that location. That's where it first arrives at town hall.
And my
Because
second,
chapter notices, because the chapter 61 notices have been time sensitive, we've got to be very efficient when that document shows up to town when it gets distributed.
Bill, do you think it's necessary to say who actually sends it out, or is it not, is it sufficient the way it reads?
It's good the way it is.
I don't think it hurts to just reference the town manager's office will distribute the notice.
Any objection?
Mr. Chairman, I think time sensitivity, as Bill mentioned, I remember this issue many times. What can really kill a possible acquisition is a slow pass around and the time. There's a definite time. How many days is it, Bill? I don't know. So I think it should be referenced in the charter with all due haste or something along those lines.
By statute, there is a requirement. I think it's 30 days.
I was under the
I thought it was 60.
60, yeah, I was under the impression it was 60.
Yeah, I know there's a requirement.
Yeah, there is a
So why don't
requirement.
we just say, she'll be sent by the town manager?
I would start with the words town
Direct notice
manager.
of
The
intent.
town manager will, or
Okay,
shall
got
send
it.
direct notice of intent to, and then list those recipients. That's very direct. And then you
Yes, I mean,
We
it
will
works
say
both
that-
ways, but that's more direct.
more direct. It's also, that could be with what Frank added, with all due haste or
So we'll
something
just
like
say the
that.
town manager will send this notice.
Yeah, right.
Okay, got it.
It just is more passive the way it's written. It'd be more active and direct if it starts with the words, the town manager.
So the next,
So I have one more question on this paragraph for Bill Cohen. Bill, tax title property, should that also be referenced within this concept, or does tax title property totally separate?
Betsy Textile is referenced in here now. That's
Oh,
chapter
that's
60.
separate. Oh, okay, thank you.
So the next change was the Appointments Advisory Committee in section 4-4-1. It has been moved to the end of chapter 3. Just felt that it better belonged in chapter 3, which was appointments, rather than chapter 4, which was elected bodies. And then we come to that 5-5-2, which had to do with the candidates for moderator. Let me just find this one, Claire, just a sec. So that would read, let's see, it's 5-5-2. It's on page 45. It just says 5-5-2, the COPC may provide a forum for all moderator candidates to share campaign platforms. Yes, Larry.
In 5-3-1,
Right.
it says that all candidates can't act until they have been sworn. But then it says by the town clerk. I'm concerned that if the town clerk, whatever, breaks an ankle and can't come to work,
Right. Good point.
if we ended faithful performance of the duties of that office. I mean, there are, by state law, that already exists.
Right.
There are a justice of the peace, can swear people in, the assistant town clerk can swear
Okay.
people in, so we might want to just leave
So
those four
put a
words.
period after office?
Yes.
Okay. Any objection? Got it. What?
Can you read that back, how that will read?
So it read, any person duly elected to any office or board shall take up the duties of the office immediately upon certification, provided that such person shall first have been sworn to the faithful performance of the duties of that office.
Okay.
Right. Mhm. Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
Would you please point me to the section that talks about tax title property, because I don't be able to find, I can't seem to be able to find it.
You mean back to the LUAC committee?
It's on the LUAC page? All right, I'll look there, thank you.
Was your question, where is the reference to chapter 60?
No. Tax title property, which
Yeah,
is different from
Chapter 60 is the tax title portion of the statute.
but this just says chapter 61. It doesn't reference tax title
Okay,
property.
look under LUAC.
Oh,
Let's see, that was,
Oh, I
60
see.
and
Oh, 60
61.
and 61, okay, I missed that. Thank you. We've added 60.
Betsy,
Thank
let me
you.
just find the section. Because I believe it references chapter 60.
Yes, yes, I didn't get that, pick that up on that, thank you.
So if you look on section 3-13-9 on page 45, which is the Land Use and Acquisition Committee, it says that the Land Use and Acquisition Committee comprised of 7 members to act in advisory capacity of the Select Board with respect to the acquisition of real estate by the town pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 60 or Chapter 61 of the Massachusetts General Laws.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't know that chapter 60 referred to tax title property,
Yes.
so I've learned something.
Does.
Thank you.
Yeah, we looked it up. It just, I mean, Chapter 60 is a long chapter. It's got a whole pile of subsections, and many of which deal with the process of the town taking a property by tax title. But the whole thing deals with tax and liens and taking of tax titles. David Beck?
Yeah, while we're talking about section 5-3-1, the time of taking office, is it worth adding language in here requiring that elected town meeting members take conflict of interest and open meeting training?
Yeah, what section was that, David?
It's 5-3-1. This is something to potentially add.
Page 44, Bill.
531.
Or 532. My question, because both elected and appointed people in this town are directed to fill out a conflict of interest form, I think, once a year, once every year, the other.
Right, this comes up every time we have a charter review or
Yeah.
commission, and now Larry's going to speak to it.
Well, town meeting members, we invented a section that applies only to Plymouth for town meeting members.
Brookline,
Well, but our section,
As it does, right.
refers only to Plymouth. You can't ask a town meeting member to deal with the state's conflict of interest because it doesn't cover town meeting members. So all of the examples that are presented in the training are non-applicable.
It's true.
But we can exceed the provisions of statute if we so choose. Right now, we ask everybody to take the conflict of interest.
Larry, let me ask you a question, because this is, we've had this debate back and forth, but if what you say is true, I'm sure it is, nevertheless, our conflict of interest rule does default to the State Ethics Commission's interpretations of conflict of interest, which must be the subject of that training. In other words, whether you wear a town meeting member hat or a finance committee hat, it still uses the same principle of conflict with money interest, conflict of interest. So it has some application. It may say the town meeting members are exempt, but nevertheless, it still has situations of state ethics, which our chapter specifically incorporates. This is all the rulings under state ethics laws.
But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, town meeting members, read this section as it applies to everyone else. It doesn't apply to them by state law. It doesn't apply to them.
But the principles apply.
The principles,
Suppose-
nothing in that particular section applies to town meeting
No, but suppose I
representatives.
have a town meeting member hat, right? And I switched it around, and now it's a finance committee hat or a city council hat. And then it's going to tell me what is a financial interest conflict. It doesn't matter whether I'm a town meeting member or one of these other officials. So therefore, I get some benefit out of situations that are presented in that training. Because regardless of the hat I'm wearing, you see what I mean? It's still the same principle if I have a financial stake.
I'm sorry, there are hundreds of interesting state laws that would help anybody who reads them. But it's not, I understand I think I understand what you're trying to accomplish. But in this particular instance, it's not a matter of saying they should or they shouldn't. It's a matter of, because it doesn't apply, to make a requirement, it just doesn't connect.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, could we find a compromise in that it's not required, but people are advised of the benefit of this process that all other elected officials undertake, that it's available for them if they so desire?
May I say something? I think that's best in the town meeting introduction. What's the workbook, the handbook, the town meeting members' handbook. That's the best place for that. And our chairman of each, or women, of each of our precincts should be making sure that all of their town meeting members, particularly their new ones, are reading that and understanding it. So I think that, but it doesn't belong in the charter, but it does belong in the town meeting handbook, that to learn more about conflict of interest and open space, open meeting law, then, and give people the links. Because if you make a requirement, then you have to have somebody who's in charge of enforcing that requirement. Who's going to collect all of these certificates?
Well,
And we don't even know if everybody on the select board, the planning board, or the Board of Health is filled out a town
But as
conflict of
members
interest.
of appointed committees, multiple appointed committees, every year I'm advised to take your open meeting, or every other year, your open meeting training, provide your certificate to your chairman, or take it to the town clerk's office. I mean, I've done it.
Not the town.
But that's by
clerks.
state
It's-
law.
It's human resources, but that.
Okay, but I've done it. So why do we ask appointed members to do it?
Because appointed members are covered
Under state law.
by the state conflict of interest laws. That's why. And town meeting members are not. And I think that if we were to put anything in there, we better clarify it to say, although you're not covered by it, we want you to do it anyway. Because if we simply put it in, we are muddying the waters and make it clear. Whatever we do, it should be at least clear. And since they're not covered by it, you're going to have to say you're not covered by it, but you might want to look at it.
Larry, this is the same discussion we've had now for the last 5 years. I've heard it at least 10 times. And you're absolutely right. the whole point was, and Betsy usually makes this point, that it doesn't hurt, you learn something, you take this training, it's a help. Yeah, it's not mandatory because you're not covered mandatory by the state, but it's a helpful piece of information to gain, so why not? The question is whether you bother putting it in the charter or just recommend that everybody take this course.
And it could be in the town meeting handbook that
Right.
everybody gets, and I think
That-
that's the appropriate
comes up
place
every
for it.
time.
If it was in the town meeting handbook, I'm sure that it would be clarified.
Yeah, it should be.
I would not want to see it in the charter.
No, I wouldn't do that. Not as a requirement. That's 384 sheets of paper that the human resources people have to collect, or somebody has to
Well,
collect, and somebody else has to track that
I understand it's
down.
not required. I still think somehow it's morally required by, and
You know,
so,
I think the last time this came up, we finally ended up by suggesting it go into the town meeting handbook. That's how it was
And with
resolved.
the link.
Right.
okay. I'm
'Cause this-
outgunned, outnumbered.
Well,
I'm
this
just
is the
gonna-
charter.
I
Yeah,
understand
this
the
is the
arguments.
charter.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bill. Bill, go ahead.
I was listening to the discussion about the requirements of committee members. Have you thought maybe this might be a place where you would put this requirement under the new oversight committee on committees, the committee that's going to be
Appointments Committee?
assembling residents? Should they be sending out notices to everybody that's been appointed to a committee, they have to take this?
Yeah,
You know what, excuse me, but we're making things more complex than we have to. Now, we've set up this appointment vetting committee, and now you want them to handle the conflict of interest training and stuff like that. You're putting on at least one more person, maybe two, with all of these duties. It's adequate the way it is, okay? You're elected, you have to do the training. You're appointed, they ask you to do the training. Let's not make it too complex. Let's not give more work to this committee that I disagree with in the first place, but let's not give them even more work. We're creating positions here that are going to cost money, and that's an issue, too.
I don't know, I was pleased the way it ended up the last time that goes into the town meeting handbook. I don't think it should be in the charter. So, we've been through the charter again. You see the changes from last night. We still have those open points. The three items. Should we continue to wait till we have two more members present before we vote on those items? There's no point to do it tonight. We don't have a full commission. Okay, what's your wish? Now, we've been through the charter. We have a paragraph that's still under discussion, which is this last chapter 7. And Mr. Hutchinson's here tonight to talk to us a little bit about it. The Collins management team did propose a single page to go into the charter as kind of just an opening. It doesn't require any establishment of a department or hiring of any people. And I think it would be good maybe to spend a few minutes to discuss what our position is with respect to that particular issue. David?
This is before we leave the charter. Looking ahead, there's a section 8, the recall of elective office holders. So I think it's 5-8, one or 5-7, I'm not sure what the number is in the new one.
It's page 47, 1166, line 1166.
Yeah,
Section 8.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that as long as we have district representatives who might need to be recalled, right now the language says, any elected town-wide office
No,
holder.
I think, David, we took care of that. We drafted a provision that addressed the recall of these new district select board members. And I believe that's...
Okay, yep.
Yep.
Section 10, I see it.
Yep. There was a simple way of doing it just by substituting the phrases. Now, before we come to the communications chapter
Just
7...
Oh, could we
Yes,
Okay.
talk about enforceability of the charter at some point tonight? Not to vote on it, but to talk about it?
Pardon me?
I would like to talk about enforceability of this charter, which is page 53, section 4.
63?
53, section 4.
53. Okay, right. Back to section 5, enforceability. Go ahead.
I woke up at 3:45 this morning thinking, wrestling Brewster is right. This is not the word enforceability is not the right word. We want adherence to the charter because we don't have, and enforceability of the conflict of interest law, I looked that up. There's a $2,000 fine and imprisonment. I mean, that's enforcement. But I think what we're really looking for, and Frank Mann referenced this last night, we're looking for adherence to the charter. We're looking for people.
No, we're looking for a process that will enhance people to follow the charter by calling them out when they don't. And that's why we're calling this enforceability of the charter. So it can't be ignored. And there's a process that we've, you don't have to have a set of fines to make it enforceable. We think that this procedure of bringing a charter violation to the forefront is a means of enforcing it, because it becomes a public process. It would certainly be known by a person running for office if they're, violated the charter repeatedly or whatever. And so it's quite typically referred to as an enforceability provision.
Okay, that's how you normally refer to it. Thank you.
Do we want to take, we haven't actually voted on that yet. Do we want to take a position on that before we have 7 members? Is there an even division of opinion on this one?
Well, I spent some time today looking at yesterday's draft charter, which is essentially the same, to look for 5 or 10 examples of.
Yes, right. That's right. You're going to look at
of people not meeting the charter. Almost all of them are procedural, where you don't have 2 meetings between the select board and the school committee, or something is delivered 2 days late, or it's a department. It's not an individual issue. It's a departmental or a governmental procedural lapse.
Well, Dave, what about a member of the select board that gets
I
involved
was
with
about to
day-to-day
say,
stuff?
except that part of the charter which prohibits an individual select person from directing someone and not going through the town manager. And it seems to me we need to have something in here that goes to executive session or has some separate confidential way of dealing with, I don't want it to become harassment or slander or a way to, have people just, really bother a selectman they don't like. But on the other hand, so there needs to be a confidential way of enforcing that part of it, because there aren't many personal, like one person, misbehaves and you want to call that person to task. Most of the provisions are, as I say, procedural, have timelines, have, number of committee members. There's a variety, almost all are procedural, some are personal, and I want some way that the personal ones can be handled discreetly, but not ignored. I mean, I'm not sure how best to say that.
But David, I can think probably of examples of other ways individuals can violate the charter. I mean, the moderator has a number of responsibilities involving where he exercises his powers. And if we ever had a moderator who didn't follow that, then certainly that would be
Then that would be another
possibility.
individual who would, there'd be some way to handle a personal complaint rather than a departmental or
So what do you suggest?
that we have some procedure in addition to what's here. I think what's here is fine if calling the town clerk or the DPW or the people not having combined meetings when they're supposed to, or reporting in a timely way. But an individual, like a moderator or a selectman, I don't want to have set up a procedure that's going to be subject to abuse. We need to have enforcement, but some confidentiality in that enforcement, at least in its initial stages. I mean, that's what I'm worried about, because a disgruntled person could use this process to
Well, let's try to do some
bother
thinking
an
then.
individual they don't
Okay,
like.
Good. Bill Cohen? Bill Cohen? Your hand is up.
Yeah.
Yeah, your hand is raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have put it down before. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the process itself, as I said, I believe it was yesterday, should be anonymous to a certain degree, that the committee that's reviewing this or getting this information should keep it in the abstract in a way. I would say as well, to Mr. Peck's comment about mostly procedural, I see a lot of instances where the charter, which explicitly asks now for the master plan to be followed, could be many instances where the master plan is not being followed, and that would be a charter violation. Whether it's someone approving something against, for the clear cutting of a forest or environmental issue like that, or other types of planning board issues or conservation commission issues or whatever, if they were to be abrogated. So again, though, I agree that the process should be made not personal at all, but some way of function, which we're trying to work out here, to make sure that the charter is adhered to as scrupulously as possible. I think it's going to take a little rewriting.
Larry?
I guess my feeling is that if we're going to take the charter seriously, what we've said is that this particular type of enforcement is making the change public, the charge public. So if just because a person says, select person, you did bad, the select person has the right, according to the charter, to say, no, I didn't. And even if you think I did, that's how I'm going to do it. Or I didn't know that it was in the charter. It is a public recognition of the change, and the public gets to make the decision as to who is correct. What we've seen in the past is no one knows what's in the charter. No one really, well, not no one, but a lot of people didn't care. And what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, this is what's going on. If it turns out that people take it seriously, then the next time there's an election, they're going to say, this person didn't even follow the charter, and this person was a select person, and oh my gosh, that's a terrible, terrible thing. Or it isn't a terrible, terrible thing, and the town clerk counts the votes, and we find out whether the public thinks it's a terrible thing. So I don't consider it harassment any more than any other enforceability of the charter would be harassment. So I'm not in favor of not following the charter. I'm also not in favor of coming up with some sort of, complex judicial penalty system. So if we're going to have enforceability, I'm willing to stick with what we have.
No, Betsy, then David.
Yes, I spoke with a resident this morning who was adamant that he wanted the town manager and select board to stay in this paragraph, and that he wanted as much light on any subject as possible and as much transparency as possible. You know, I had questioned last night whether it should go to the town manager and the select board, and he was quite almost desk-pounding adamant, yes, the public deserves all the information it can get and all the transparency it can get, and that both parties have an opportunity to have their say. And if somebody's reputation or whatever is tarnished somewhat by somebody's accusation, that's sad, but it's much sadder if we don't have transparency and the ability for the public to feel confident that our charter is being followed. So it's balancing, and I think that's what Larry is saying, it's balancing those two needs, the need of each. I mean, one of the things I said to this person is, you know, we're all, almost every one of us is a volunteer, you know, as far as boards that are appointed. I mean, we're all volunteers here. Somebody might say we're not following the charter, but I think most people who are volunteering in our town are doing so because they care about the town. And so I think most violations will be, I didn't realize. And sometimes, you know, you can read a sentence in a charter and misinterpret it a different way than somebody else interprets it. So as much as we've tried to be clear, somebody may not, for example, know what Chapter 60 is, like I didn't tonight. So I think that I understood what this person was saying, and they were saying transparency is of the most important issue here.
David?
Well, speaking as someone who sat in the seat for 20-plus years, I would like to see the transparency, too. If you can't have this brought before the public, then it's the very thing that we're worried about. It sits on the sideline and nobody knows anything about it. I was accused of 2 ethics violations. In both cases, I was completely exonerated because they were bogus charges. But you know what? It went through the process, and I came out on top. Had I done something wrong, then I would expect to be called on the carpet for it. So I would like to see, there has to be some discretion, okay? But by the same token, it shouldn't be, we don't want to hurt this person's feelings, so we're not going to bring it up. It should be out in the open, out where the public can see it, and then, as Larry said, they make their own decisions.
I
Yeah,
guess-
I tend to agree with this panel. I don't think it's worth doing unless it becomes a matter of,
Okay, you know, I just was, you know.
I'm just worried.
I was trying to be, well, no, it's that it could be abused by citizens who wanted to get at the director of planning. If they, Frank's right, I mean, there are some other personal points and a single point of responsibility where people could just lay on the complaints and say, you know, you know.
yeah, but
and,
David, then it would become obvious at some point that it's.
or it could be a group that all take turns laying. I'm just trying to
Right.
provide some discretion is the word for, you know, an individual who is so accused. But I'm listening. You know, David sat in the seat, and I'm listening to Larry. So, okay, I'm certainly willing to give it a try because I have an open mind to that. So,
Controversially, I think that the place where this is most apt to come up is town meeting members voting on something that somebody else thinks they shouldn't be voting on. I think that may be where we get most of the activity for this particular charter.
no, but I mean, to me, it's the perception that current and past select board individuals have, you know, issued direct instructions to department heads and individuals rather than going through the town manager. I mean, it happens in other towns too. It's not just it's here, but you know, other town structures actually repeat the same language. You know that the executive has to work through the town manager and not directly with department heads.
David, I think that with social media, which I don't have much time for on purpose. I think that the process of calling out various people is powerful. And I suspect that for people who do participate in that area, it can get pretty excited and excitable. The process that we've come up with is much more of a legal, calm, staid process that can be only, it's the beginning of what can happen. If someone makes a presentation to the town clerk's not necessarily, I don't think the town clerk's going to stand out with a sign in front of town hall. I just received a message. So I understand and appreciate what you're aiming at, but I don't think that I think that all that it's doing is it's opening up the problem, potential problem, to public view. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the public was interested enough in town government that made a difference?
Right.
I was definitely in favor of this from the beginning, and I was concerned when Betsy brought up her concern about town meeting, the town manager versus the town clerk. And I thought maybe, and I also knew, I brought this up initially in our first days because I saw it in the Provincetown charter. But to point out, the Provincetown changed their charter a few years after they put this in to modify it slightly because it did get a level of interest that was maybe more than they expected. But, I'm all in favor of sunshine, and if this process, as though my wise colleagues here perceive, is legalistic and not given to
Right.
histrionics, and then I am willing to join the consensus here. and
Remember,
say,
Frank, we
keep it
had,
as is.
we had several versions of an enforcement before us, and Provincetown was way over on one end. And then there was some that were so mild they were pointless. And this one, which was a Falmouth provision, seemed to be right in the middle. Seemed to strike a good balance. It wasn't too punitive or too elaborate. One of the key things here is not the initial complaint, but it's the response. Once the complaint is made, I'm going to be more interested in the reply and why the action was taken, whether it was justifiable. I think that's really very interesting to know and helpful. So this is addressed to Pat. We need to work on the transition provisions, which is going to be in the charter that we present next week. So far, we have the district implementation committee for the select board districts. And we've talked about, that's really the only one I think that we put some meat in it. But we need to come up with a transition list of topics for transition. One of them might be this communications section with a recommendation to the town manager to perhaps study it to see if it makes sense and to develop it into a functioning department. Should we now turn to this Chapter 7, which is the last provision, which is on communications and engagement? We have a couple of versions. We have the Collins recommendation, which was in their memo number 11. And I think it's included, we put it in this draft of the charter as Section 7. Now, it's on page 52. You see, it's really short, but it's a good lead into the whole subject as to whether this is something the town wants to develop. And the last provision says the town manager shall be responsible for developing and implementing a comprehensive communication and engagement strategy as provided in section 3-5-1. So that, we're thinking that this is enough to get our foot in the door on the subject, and that maybe a provision could be put in the transition that it could be studied further by the town manager.
On a very minor
Yes.
note, we need to change the periods to dashes.
Yeah,
And also, I think we changed Z to Y.
change what?
I think we changed Z. It's 3-5-1, and then in the parentheses, I think it should be
Yes,
Y.
yes, right,
Yeah,
YZ, right.
right.
Yes, David?
Just looking at, I think it's important to have, good, robust language about communications and engagement. But I'm wondering, its relationship of the Chapter 7 to that paragraph Z on page 30, which is a town manager responsibility, be responsible for town government communications, including not limited to strategy, announcements, blah, 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 which, is
Yeah, what's the letter you're referring to?
Z, but it's line number 730 on page 30.
Yeah, I got the page. Oh, the very last item.
Right. I mean, there's some duplication between this and the new
Yes.
Chapter 7.
Exactly.
And
That's a good point.
so we just need to know what we want. I lean toward the Chapter 7. I think it's more
Right.
robust. But then we would probably drop out Z if we,
Can't we have it really in both places? But if we put it, we're back on page 30, we're listing it as one of the functions and duties of the town manager.
well, in that,
That
at the
doesn't
very
hurt.
least, you do not need to cross-reference then. You need to say,
Right. Perhaps a cross-reference.
Yeah.
Here tonight, to speak on this point, has given a lot of thought to it, is Mr. Hutchinson. So we're advancing the public comment by a few minutes, but seems to be timely.
I'm not sure where you guys are and what you wanted me to comment on here. I mean, I have my own comments, but.
Communications and engagement, we're referring to the Chapter 7 that's now been proposed for the charter.
Yes, but you were fussing about something with item Z, and you didn't want me to
No,
say
there's-
anything.
There's also a reference in the list of town manager duties
Oh, right.
that says he's responsible for communications. and
Yes,
Fostering engagement.
Well, my proposal had a director reporting at the town manager level. I mean, I would have him or her report to Derek, or the town manager. That's what I meant when I,
So Joe, what I'm thinking is, does this make sense if you have something very broad like this in the charter as a lead-in, and then put in the transition provisions, because you had a lot of substance, is what you're suggesting, that the town manager be, I don't know if the right word is directed or whatever, to study this subject and develop it, because he seems to have a very keen interest in just doing that.
yeah. My inclination is that if you don't include a department and someone responsible for this function, then you won't get it off the ground. Derek can plug in a hole here and there. Somebody can do a minor overhaul, but I would prefer that you think about this function broadly. Plymouth is about Plymouth Rock and the Mayflower and Patuxent. And, we have issues that we talk about with respect to gambling and racetracks, and our identity is something that we have to define, and that's a very broad set of functions. It's not just, a one-time overhaul of a website. It's programmatic kinds of efforts that need to get established probably in small increments. I think that you could probably do a basic phase one for under $30,000, that you wouldn't need to have a director to do that, that Derek could get that done easily. So, it's an incremental function that
would happen across time. That's how I envisioned, I mean, what I gave you folks was a very broad vision of what the program would look like. And at this point, you need plans that will live underneath that, that Derek, as the responsible person, would hire someone to manage. Probably a year or so from now. That's at least how I see it. Does that make sense to you?
Is there, I guess I'm asking you whether you think it's proper for the charter to basically direct the creation of a department?
Yes.
And hiring personnel.
The other charters do it. I think ours does it, doesn't it? I mean, we talk about departments and department heads, and we talk about responsibilities, and this is how you would establish such a thing. How else would you do it? Betsy.
Well, one way is to put it in a transition section and direct it to be studied, and if the town manager thinks that it's, and apparently he already does, worth doing, then he develops the program.
Yeah.
Let me ask Pat. Pat, are you familiar with this kind of an issue in handling it in a charter?
I am. I think we saw when the town manager spoke to the commission that, as well as there's a trend among municipalities to take particular departmental staffing issues out of the charter and putting them at the level of bylaws and under the town manager's direction, so that they can shape the departments and be more intimately involved in the HR decisions from the ground level. So I think the Collins Center would recommend that this be either part of a transition or something that is handled at the bylaw or town manager level. And there are a lot of great ideas, but I do think that the charter might not be the place to be directing this specific department and employees that are under that department.
I was thinking that based on Chapter 7, then the town manager would come up with his plan and then bring that to town meeting for town meeting to have pass as part of his budget. This person or department or whatever he decides or she decides, because they're responsible for developing, says here, developing the plan, the communication engagement strategy. So I would think once they had developed their strategies, that they would then bring that to town meeting to support a director or a person or whatever the town manager felt would be implementing what he had or she had developed.
This is maybe minor, maybe not. In 711, the not just as an occasional process or activity is negative. It seems to me if it was eliminated, it would strengthen the entire, that whole section.
To take that out.
Take those, just those words out.
Any objection to Larry's suggestion? In 7-1-1, strike where it says not just an occasional process or activity. Larry, what do you think about the rest of it? 7?
Mr. Chairman, it's
David?
It's a nice overview, kind of a statement of purpose. But I'm looking back on the Watertown one that was shared with us in one of the Collins things, which is more specific, that includes reporting on benchmarks and how you're doing on strategic priorities. So I can read it now or just cross-reference in page 9 of, I think, their memo number 8. But I remember being impressed by Watertown's because it was specific. It wasn't just saying communication and broad communication and open up lines and listen, but it said be responsible for town communications, including but not limited to a comprehensive communication strategy, coordinating the announcements and messages from department heads, communicating regularly via available media avenues with residents, ensuring that all aspects of the city's website are kept up to date, and soliciting recommendations for greater communication in order to provide transparency, accountability, and opportunity to communicate expectations and results to the public, maintain a public-facing data and performance management initiative that periodically monitors, reports, and benchmarks progress on the implementation of the strategic priorities, performance measures to benchmark activities, but it gives a detailed charge to communication. So I just like that one. It's a little more specific, yet charter-like, rather than
Yep.
what I consider our current Chapter 7.
Joe, what do you think of something like that?
That's a lot closer to what I want.
Right.
That's for sure. I mean, my basic concern is just from having worked in large corporations for a long time, that if you don't assign a person responsibility for enterprises of great pith and moment, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. I mean, Shakespeare was right. If you don't name someone and put them in charge, then then things tend to get lost. So that's where I would like to leave it. Dave is right. That's a lot closer to what I want. What the Collins folks found the same things that you found and that I found. So, the Watertown, and of the three that they cited, the Watertown was by far the one that was most attractive to me. But the model city charter that they referenced was what I used as the meat of what I put in my proposal, and I would hate to see that get lost. And so, David's proposal makes. I mean, if you're not going to put someone in charge, then at least do that.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm worried that what David read out is a little too specific for something that's in its infancy, and I think it needs to be worked into. Not all at once, not jump into everything all at once. I think that's a little too specific. So I think it needs to be worked into in a transitional phase.
Well, I was going to say, perhaps it becomes the second major transition paragraph.
Yep.
So leave the town manager's paragraph Z in there, making the town manager responsible for communications, and then put development of communications and public engagement as one of the transitions.
I think it would be good, though, to also include it as a separate chapter.
Yeah, but it
So
could be in the
there'd be
transition.
three references to it,
Yeah.
right? Z, Chapter 7, and then transition.
I think that the Collins folks had an 8 and a 9. I'm not sure which of those might
No,
be the
8
transition.
No, we numbered them, Joe. The last.
Right, 7, 8, and 9, right?
We just took the last provision, which was 7, but that isn't the last one in the charters. We moved that back and put the transition as 9. And
Right, so we're going the transition. I mean, so the way I envisioned the transition would have been establish the department and the director, and then leave the work to Derek, leave the work to the town manager.
That'd be a
And then, I would
paragraph
talk
at the
to,
end.
I have a call with him tomorrow to discuss what that transition would look like. And that would be what would go in Chapter 9, I assume.
The transition is the final chapter,
Yeah, Chapter 9.
and that would be one of the items in transition.
Yeah.
But I
That's-
think it should also have its own small lead-in, which we're calling Chapter 7.
Right, I
Broad
got it.
language. Chapter 8 is the general section for enforcement, and
Yeah.
charter review.
And Chapter 9 is the transition section.
Right.
And that's where I would work with, well,
I think that
not
works.
that, I mean, it's never been clear to me how to work with the Collins folks, and there's been no process. So things keep, well, you can either have them work with Derek, or you can have me work with Derek, but it doesn't look like we would work together to work with Derek, so.
No, but I think as a practical matter, as I mentioned to you earlier today, that the Collins team is contractually obligated to this commission to get our charter drafted with their advice and help us get us through the whole process and onto the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
don't,
that's what we're doing with Collins.
okay, I mean, I don't, all due respect, but I can do this by myself. I mean, my thought was that the Collins folks would be the vehicle for it, but if you were looking for me to work with Derek, I'm happy to do that, and he seems happy to do it as well, so.
So we're trying to prepare the groundwork here so that would happen. In other words, we're laying it out as a guideline for the future, I guess. And once the charter is in effect, and then you're off and running with this particular department.
Okay,
Because the transition has life after the charter is adopted.
well, that's not my impression of transition chapters, but that could be, it's
Well, I
possible.
think the transition's kind of a message to the town manager, what happens next. Certain things that we studied.
Yeah, transition
Reports.
chapters that I've studied are afterthoughts. They're things that people couldn't think of. I get it. I can work with it. That's okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you very much.
Bill,
Appreciate
I'm
it,
going to
Joe.
apologize, but I would like to still go back one more time to enforceability of this charter, if you don't mind, on page 53.
53?
Yeah, it's sentence 1330. I mean, it's number.
Wait, we're on page-
Line 1330, which is right at the bottom of page 53.
63 or 53?
53, 53.
1330. Okay, go ahead.
Is it the intention of this commission that the person who is writing the complaint be anonymous or not?
So what's your question? So this is the language about the written complaint shall identify the official or government body?
But it doesn't say it'll identify the person making the complaint. Are we wanting the person making the complaint to be anonymous, or are we wanting them to identify themselves? If we want them,
It starts off by saying any person who has reason to believe, and then it says may file a written complaint with the town clerk.
but do they have to attach their name to it? or
It
is
doesn't say that.
That's what I'm saying, does the commission want this complaint to be anonymous, or do they want the name of the person making the
So
complaint?
that's
as
the
part-
question.
Because I think it's the question that we should answer in the charter.
So how do you feel about it?
I think that if the person wants to make a complaint, they should attach their name to it.
And that's how I feel. If you're going to make a
And that's how
complaint,
I feel,
have the guts to put your name to it.
yeah.
So I
Frank, you have a
think
position
that we
on
would
this?
add to the written complaint shall identify the person making the complaint, or
So
something
the
like
accuser
that.
would have to become known,
I'm sorry, what?
Yes,
right?
the accuser would have to become known.
Okay, yeah, something, I don't know what the
I think
legal
that's the
language is, but
consensus.
I think it's important if someone makes a complaint. And the other question I have is,
So we want to clarify that here and put a couple of words in that says that.
yes, and the
Right,
other question
okay.
I have is, it says any person. I get on Facebook with Frank Mand and lots of other people, and there are lots of people from all over the country who get into Facebook, Plymouth's political page. It says any person. Do we want them to be residents or not? So it says any person, so do we want to put any resident, or do we want not to put any resident? Any person is anybody, anywhere.
Well, if they identify themselves,
I mean-
I don't think we should restrict.
To residents,
To residents.
because,
Well, because it could be regional issues or other issues that people have a concern with.
Well, we're just looking at the charter enforcement, though, not regional enforcement, right?
No, I'm saying people who see this the violation in a broader sense, so they're, their standing, is that interest.
Could you give an example, please, Frank?
An attorney who believes there's been a violation in the town, as evidenced in a violation of the charter, who believes it's an ethical issue. And we get complaints all the time over open meeting law, not all the time, but open meeting law complaints don't have to come from residents of the town, they can come from interested parties.
But doesn't that go to the state, open meeting law? That's a state violation.
No, I'm saying the complaint comes against the town, I mean, I can't think of exactly specific issues. I know a lot of organizations are involved in issues that are regional in basis, and they could find that a community is, that if they're violating their charter, they might be violating that issue that cuts across towns in this area. As long as they identify themselves, so that, as you said, they're not an anonymous person, not a person pretending to be not somebody just trying to stir up a problem.
Frank, why should it be limited to a Plymouth resident? I mean, we're trying to see that our charter doesn't get violated. I mean, why allow Fred from...
Well, I'm not hearing you, I'm sorry. I don't hear what you're saying.
I'm just saying, why do we allow anyone other than a Plymouth resident to kick off this process?
Yeah, I think, I like the idea of residents, but I'm willing to listen to any other argument.
A violation of the charter is a violation of the charter.
But, any other comments before?
Collins.
Yes, Pat?
Hi. A couple of situations I can see would be employees wanting to bring a charter complaint. Say, for example, they felt they were unfairly directed by someone who was not supposed to direct them under the charter, or other aggrieved parties. So perhaps, and we can tune up this language, it could be any resident, town employees, or parties aggrieved by a violation. But we can change some language, because those are other situations in addition to actual residents who may want to bring complaints under the charter.
Good point.
That makes
Yeah,
sense,
It's an
yeah.
excellent point.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
Okay, so Pat, you're going to make some suggestions to modify this language.
I will. I will.
But, that's a particularly good point, that an employee, and that would put them in a potential compromise, so we have to think about that.
Oh, could they be anonymous?
That's what we just need to.
No, they said no. We said identify.
Yeah.
He's saying
Well,
he's
I'm-
thinking of an
it- it-
exception.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, that's why we just need to think about that, because it's as likely as not, an employee who might feel that it was inappropriate to get direction from somebody, and then it's a retaliation. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that could go on. So she's raising a good point.
Well, it seems to me that strategically, if an employee didn't want to attach his name to it, you can find someone else to make to attach the name. I mean, I like the idea. My thought is just add the word signed before written complaint.
Yeah.
Whoever signs it, I mean, basically, if we got someone from, if you read the Globe, when something goes on and someone writes a letter from Florida or Arizona, I don't take it very seriously that he's writing to the Globe. And it seems to me that I don't have a problem with allowing whoever wants to make a complaint. People will take it more seriously if it's someone from Plymouth than, someone trying to make a point about a national subject by dealing with our charter.
But it does raise the issue. I mean, we might, a town employee, 30% of our employees might live in Carver, Kingston, elsewhere. So if we leave it as anyone, but they sign and identify themselves, that'd be useful, rather than residents. And then we have part-timers here who are part-time residents here and then live in California or Arizona or Florida. So I think just signing and identifying themselves is sufficient.
We'll see what Pat comes up with respect to additional language. I would think if there is such a person as an aggrieved party and they weren't from Plymouth, they should still be able to file a complaint if in fact they're aggrieved. Betsy?
Earlier, this came up in our conversation and it logged in my head, but I didn't get a chance to ask about it at the time. I believe, Pat, you said that Falmouth, was it you who said that Falmouth had a stricter enforceability and it got cumbersome and so they made it less strict? Did you say something like that?
I thought Frank.
Oh, was it Frank? Oh, Provincetown. Okay, was it Frank, was that you that said Provincetown?
I believe that was the warrant I looked, the charter I looked at was Provincetown that originally had one and then modified it.
Because it was difficult to enforce?
Not difficult to enforce, I believe it was kind of insinuated by the change, but I think it was that, I don't want to say abused, but they were getting, it was a hot topic, so then they, in the succeeding year, they modified it slightly.
Maybe Pat knows something about that. Do you know anything about the Provincetown enforceability clause?
I know that it did undergo some changes. I wouldn't want to speak or guess why they made those changes. I could definitely look into it a little bit more and report back to you. So I understand that Falmouth was the one that I believe Mike looked into and found, and the one instance he found that was going through that they thought that it had been, handled well. But I'm not sure about Provincetown, and I wouldn't want to speak to why they made the changes. I do know that they've made some changes to their policy.
Okay, thank you.
Their charter.
Okay, any other comments on any changes in the charter tonight? There are no minutes to approve. Is there any old business? Does anyone have any new business? Next meeting of the commission is next Monday at 7. Try to be here so we can take care of the 3 votes that we need to complete the process. Everybody can be here next week?
I'll be on Zoom.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Right. For commissioners who are on Zoom, I just want to say that when a Zoom person raises their hand, it indicates they want to speak, but it doesn't indicate they have a right to interrupt and speak immediately. They have to join the queue with everyone else. So if Fred's hand is up, that's interesting, but he's in line with all the rest of the people. And unfortunately, and I firmly believe it, it puts the Zoom person at a disadvantage. But that's the way that the process works, and if you're concerned about that, then you have to be here in person. Zoom is not perfect. So the folks that are on Zoom, I think they do understand it, and they have to wait their turn, and hopefully they'll be recognized. Is there anything further to come before us?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded? All in favor of adjourning? All right. So till Monday night. We're adjourned. Thank you.